So, welcome back everybody to our monthly AVH study group webinars. Tonight, it's my pleasure to have back with us Kim Leah. Everyone knows Kim as an engaging and incredibly informed and fun speaker, and we're looking forward to his talk tonight on the therapeutic pocketbook method of Bönninghausen. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kim Leah.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for everyone who's on the call today. I'm particularly excited to be talking again about the Bönninghausen therapeutic pocketbook repertory, primarily because I just am using it more and more in my practice on a regular basis. And certainly when I first started with homeopathy, I wasn't even really familiar with the Bönninghausen therapeutic pocketbook repertory, let alone using it. And I was trained in the Kentian repertory, but really as I continue in my practice, I find it more and more useful. So what I'd like to do during tonight's short presentation is just give you a little bit of a background for those of you who haven't heard it about the repertory itself. I want to present a couple of cases, one in particular that's quite interesting that we'll just look at really fast, and then present a more comprehensive case that we can work on together. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started with the presentation. And so I wanted to start by sharing the story. This last summer, I was teaching a week-long seminar in the Czech Republic at what they refer to as the summer school. And this is essentially 7 grueling days of teaching where you teach 8 hours a day for 7 days. And there's 56 hours of teaching. I don't know how I survived it, to be perfectly honest, but it was quite an interesting experience. And basically, they had asked that I speak on 3 different topics: the therapeutic pocketbook repertory by Bönninghausen, the treatment of asthma using homeopathic remedies, and the bowel nosodes. And I decided to start off with the therapeutic pocketbook repertory because, of course, it's the repertory which is most aligned with Hahnemann's thinking, and I thought that that would lay a good foundation for the rest of the course. In any case, I started presenting cases, and I could see the faces of the audience, and they were very skeptical. They were looking at me like, why isn't he presenting the new remedies and the new ideas in homeopathy? I mean, that's what we want, these remedies we've never heard of and ideas that have just been generated out of homeopathy, and this is what we want. But, I know the value of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, so I persisted, and I continued to present cases. And on the second day, I began to present what we refer to as one-sided cases. And I'm sure people are familiar with that terminology. A one-sided case is one where there's simply not a lot of symptoms in the case, so it becomes very difficult to find the best remedy for that particular patient. Maybe there's a lack of modalities or not good locations, or just a paucity of symptomatology. And I was presenting these one-sided cases, and during the lunch break, one of the women, she'd been practicing for quite a long period of time, maybe like 20 plus years. She was one of the better students in the class. She came up to me and handed me a photograph of her daughter. And here you can see the photograph. It was this very aggressive impetigo that was on the left side of her face and was aggressively spreading to the right cheek. And she had given 7 different remedies without any results whatsoever. If I remember correctly, some of the remedies she'd given were sulfur, Graphites, I think she gave Basilina, Miserium, I don't remember the other ones, but anyway, 7 different remedies without any change whatsoever in the case. And so she handed me the photograph and said, can you help her? And I said, well, why don't we just do the case in front of the class using the therapeutic pocketbook repertory? This is the perfect situation to demonstrate the value of this particular tool in homeopathic practice. So basically, there wasn't, as I said, there wasn't a lot of information in the case. All that she had were basically these 5 symptoms. So she, now you can't really see it here, but if you look in the center of the scab, that's actually a salve that's sitting on top of the impetigo. So it's hard to tell, but actually it's ulcerated in the center, and on the outer edge of the ulcer are these blisters. And there's actually a rubric in the therapeutic pocketbook repertory called ulcers with blisters surrounding it. And I think there's about 20-something remedies in that particular rubric. So it's a nice rubric, not too large, but it does contain a sufficient number of remedies to be able to use it in practice. So I selected that rubric. It was worse at night, which is not particularly useful because there's 121 remedies in that particular rubric in the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, and there's only 125 remedies in the whole repertory. So basically all that does is exclude 4 remedies from your choice. That's not particularly helpful. It was worse opening the mouth, but I mean, if you look at this, it's really not too surprising that this would be worse opening the mouth. So it is a modality, but it's not a particularly surprising modality, and certainly not an Aphorism 153 striking characteristic sign and symptom of the disease type of modality. And it was also worse touch, which again, you know, if you look at this, it's not too surprising that it would be worse touch. You would expect it to be worse touch. It would be surprising if it wasn't worse touch. But again, I don't have a lot to work with, so I chose that modality. And then finally, the last piece of information in the case is that there was a sensation as the impetigo was spreading, as if there were crawling insects, like a formication type of symptom or sensation in the case. And that's essentially what I had to work with. Now, if I repertorize these 5 rubrics in a Kentian repertory, even in Kent's repertory itself, but especially in one of the more contemporary Kentian repertories like the therapeutic, like the complete repertory or synthesis, for example, I can guarantee you that you'll have a number of remedies running through all of these symptoms. That's not the worst thing in the world, but there wouldn't be one remedy that would clearly stand out as being the best choice, because these rubrics have gotten overly large because we keep adding remedies to the rubrics. They get really bloated, and as a consequence, many of the rubrics no longer have the capacity to qualify your cases at all. So, but when you use the therapeutic pocketbook repertoire, as I'm going to show you right now, here are the 5 rubrics that I selected. The ulcers with the blisters around it. Actually, there's only 12 remedies in that rubric. The worse at night, the worse opening the mouth, the worse from pressure, and then that sensation of the insects that are crawling, 5 rubrics. And if I repertorize this case, you will see that the only remedy that shows up in all 5 of these rubrics using the therapeutic pocketbook repertory is the remedy mercury. And so I opened up Chronic Diseases by Hahnemann, and I showed them some of the symptoms of mercury, and I said, I think this really is the best choice in this case. I suggested at that point that she give the young woman a 30C every 2 hours in solution, succussing between each dose. This is the posology method associated with the 5th edition of the Organon. Hahnemann continued to use the C potencies. Remember, the 5th edition comes out in 1833, but he continues to use the C potencies. The difference between the 4th and the 5th edition is that in the 5th edition, he basically begins to use higher potencies. And for Hahnemann, higher potencies is 30C, basically. He never uses higher than a 30C. But he also begins to put the remedies in solution, and he succusses between the doses. And also he admits the possibility of continuing to repeat the remedy even while the patient is improving. So those are the fundamental differences. By the way, there's a lot of background noise for whoever's still not unmuted, just so you know. So in any case, I suggested a 30C in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose. The mother didn't have a 30C. She had an 18C. So I said, okay, go ahead and give the 18C and go ahead and try to get the 30C. And as soon as you get that, go ahead and switch over. So they started on the 18C. On the very first dose of 18C, immediately the impetigo stopped spreading. And after 60 hours, she looked like this. So just to contrast it, she looked like this. And then 60 hours later, she went looking like this. Now, I've seen some pretty miraculous stuff with homeopathy. I've never seen anything quite as dramatic as this. And theoretically, your skin really even shouldn't be able to heal that quickly. So it's a profound demonstration of the power of homeopathy, but also the efficacy of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory and how it really is an invaluable tool in homeopathic practice. Again, it's the repertory that's most aligned with Hahnemann's thinking. It's the only repertory that Hahnemann ever approved of was the earlier repertories by Bönninghausen. And unfortunately, many people have lost the art of using this. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy repertory to use. There's only 2,250 rubrics in the whole repertory. When you compare that with a lot of the other contemporary repertories, it's quite a bit smaller, so quite a bit easier to learn how to use. And now that we have such a fine English translation by George Demetriadis, with really fantastic little notes explaining the meaning of each of the rubrics and how to use them, I think we've got a tool that can really assist us with better results in practice. And especially for veterinarians, where the emphasis is not so much on the mental symptoms, but more on the locations and the modalities and things that are concrete and easily discernible in the animal. I think this is really an invaluable repertory to use. So I'm going to go ahead now and move on to a little bit of the background on the repertory, and then we'll present and go through another case, work through it together. Before I do that, are there any questions about the case that I presented relative to anything that they'd like to know?
Let's see. Nope, I don't see anything.
Okay.
So, yep.
Alrighty, so let's proceed then. I just want to mention that throughout the history of homeopathy, there's been a tremendous amount of praise, both for Bönninghausen and also the therapeutic pocketbook repertory. And I just want to give you a sense of the tremendous accolades that Bönninghausen received throughout and after his life for the work that he did for homeopathy. Dunham in 1885, for example, wrote that it is a misfortune for our American students that our translators selected the elementary works of Jahr in preference to Bönninghausen. And this has to do with the fact that the Allentown Academy, which was the oldest school of homeopathy in the United States, Herring was involved with it, basically, for whatever reason, they decided not to choose Bönninghausen's therapeutic pocketbook repertory for English translation, but instead the repertory that had been created by George Jahr. And this was very unfortunate because Jahr, who had worked with Hahnemann in the 1840s in Paris, was very much criticized by Hahnemann as being very, very sloppy, and very imprecise in his work, and really did a lousy job. And he was also criticized by other people as well, like Dunham and Allen and Herring also. And so unfortunately, that was really the beginning of the repertory, English repertories, and that was the foundation that went on to become Hall's Jahr, and then eventually the repertory by Lee, and then Constantine Lippe, and then into, well, actually it was Lippe and then Lee, and then into Kent. And so the whole foundation of it was started off on a bad foot, and it only got worse from there. A. McNeill in 1896 wrote about Bönninghausen that the repertory which is the most indispensable to the thorough study of a difficult case still remains Bönninghausen's pocketbook. It has not been superseded, nor do I think it ever will be, although a new edition is now sorely needed. Now, it's interesting that that was written in 1896 because the first edition of Kent's repertory is published in 1897, so he probably couldn't have foreseen what was going to happen. But basically, Kent basically took over the prominence of repertories, and the therapeutic pocketbook repertory was largely forgotten for the most part, especially in the English-speaking countries of the world. And then Phineas Parkhurst Wells in 1896, also the same year, wrote, between 400 or 500 cases of croup without a loss is certainly a remarkable good record, and this was given to me by Bönninghausen himself in April 1858 as the result of his then experience with his method. You have to realize that Bönninghausen had tremendous success as a practitioner, and not only for issues, physical health issues, but also treated a lot of mental and emotional disorders with great success. He had a huge practice and tremendous results. Timothy Field Allen in the North American Journal of Homeopathy in 1891 wrote that I submit that of all plans which have ever been adopted, that of Bönninghausen is the best. It consists essentially, considering all symptoms, to consist of three elements, namely locality, sensation, and condition of amelioration and aggravation. In my daily work, I'm constantly in want of knowledge of the condition of aggravation or amelioration. I found it in a moment, and as my eye glances over the list of drugs, one or two impress me, and I refer to the Materia Medica for confirmation, or I turn to a locality or a sensation, or endeavor to combine all three and study a drug or drugs found under every heading. The chief discussion hinges on the possibility of taking the three elements and regrouping a symptomatology to correspond to that of the patient. That's essentially the method there, where you deconstruct the symptoms and then regroup them again in different patterns or different organizations. Such a method is simple, compact, and has, I am bound to say, stood the test of large experience. I've worn out 4 or 5 bindings to Bönninghausen's pocketbook, purchased in 1861, and have always found it convenient and reliable. I could not work without it. And then Stuart Close, who wrote The Genius of Homeopathy, wrote that the experience of nearly a century has verified the truth of Bönninghausen's idea and enabled us, in the use of his masterpiece, the Therapeutic Pocketbook, to overcome to a great extent the imperfections and limitations of our Materia Medica. Now, there was also criticism of Bönninghausen as well. So, for example, Bozier, who wrote what is now referred to as the Bönninghausen Repertory, it's kind of a misnomer. It's really the Bozier-Bönninghausen Repertory. He wrote that the postgraduate school in Boston hopes to have me teach Bönninghausen and Kent principally. I'm free to say that I can't work their methods as well as I can work my own. I have never been able to follow Kent literally at all, but Kent less than Bönninghausen. So obviously Bozier, even though he prepared his own repertory based on Bönninghausen's work and wrote a lot about Bönninghausen, didn't seem to fully understand actually the therapeutic pocketbook method, and that's absolutely the case. He didn't fully understand it. We also see criticisms by Herring, where Herring wrote that it was a great mistake of Bönninghausen to separate the conditions as if ever one of them could have a general applicability. And then Ernest Farrington wrote that when the book was being written, Dr. Herring urged the author to state just what symptoms or group of symptoms were affected by a given condition. But Bönninghausen refused to comply with this request, as reasonable as it was, so his book was crippled, and we have lost irreparably the particulars of his vast clinical work. Now, what's being criticized here is the fact that Bönninghausen deconstructed all the symptoms so that you don't have modalities associated with a particular condition. There is no head pain, worse eating, or worse pressure, or better ascending the stairs. There's nothing like that. The modalities are completely separated from the locations in the body and the conditions with which they might be associated with, and they're placed in a separate chapter called modalities. And that allows you to reconstruct symptoms that actually were never seen in improving or in clinical practice. I'll just give you a quick example. We know, for example, that in cholesynthis, they have abdominal complaints that are better pressure. You can find that in the proving of cholesynthis, and we've seen it in clinical practice. We can also find in the proving of cholesynthis that they've got head pain. But we've never seen in the proving of cholesynthis head pain better pressure, because it was just never came up in that proving. However, because everything is broken out into little pieces, we can actually reconstruct the symptom using the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, which would be head pain, better pressure, and we would find the remedy cholesynthis. And this is essentially what Herring and Farrington and also Kent were really criticizing. They were saying, hey, you know, you're allowing information to be created that we've never seen, that we don't know is true. And it's a legitimate and interesting argument. However, I think what they overlook is the fact that the purpose of repertorization is not to tell you the remedy. The purpose of repertorization is to suggest a group of remedies which are then compared and studied in the Materia Medica. And because you have to go back to the Materia Medica and read the remedy, if the therapeutic pocketbook repertory suggests a remedy which really doesn't fit the totality of the characteristic symptoms in the case, you're simply not going to prescribe that remedy. But on the other hand, it may allow you to find a remedy which might not have been possible to find using one of the Kentian type of repertories, where the modalities are linked to their conditions or the different parts of the body that the modality is associated with. You can see that this criticism was also extended to Harvey Farrington, who did the course on homeopathic prescribing, where he wrote that Bönninghausen's repertory used extensively by the earlier homeopaths deals only with general symptoms and conditions and is therefore not well suited to the student. I disagree completely. And Kent also wrote that the chief difficulty with Bönninghausen's repertory was the modalities of the parts, and those of the patients were all mixed together. I did not use it successfully. And again, I think this is largely because they didn't understand the actual construction and how to use it. This is really the value of the work that George Demetriadis has done, is that he's really clarified the structure of the repertory, added those endnotes, and really explained in the introductory passages to that repertory exactly how to use it effectively in practice. I just want to mention very quickly that there's been a whole history of repertories. We could argue that the very first repertory was one that was created by Hahnemann in 1805 called Fragmenta de Viribus. It's not really a repertory. It's kind of more like a word index. And then 12 years later, he came out with the Symptom Dictionary. He wasn't satisfied with either one of these repertories at all. And so he asked various individuals to help him create a repertory. And eventually, a number of different people tried to create their repertories: Hartlaub, Schweikert, Weber, Ruckert. None of them were particularly good. Some of them are huge and long, and the construction wasn't particularly didn't have the level of ingeniousness associated with Bönninghausen's repertory. And then in 1832, Bönninghausen released what is referred to as the Systematic Alphabetical Repertory of Anti-Psoric Remedies, or the SRA. And this is the first repertory that Hahnemann approved of. Again, 1832, Repertory of Medicines which are anti-psoric. And this was where the grading system is introduced. It's all based on remedies that have been proven. No remedies that have not been proven are included in this repertory. And he introduces this 4-tier grading system, which is based on the ideas and thinking of Hahnemann, where Hahnemann has doubtful symptoms, plain type and bold type. The symptoms being more reliable and useful in practice would be given bold type. And basically this 4-grade system, the way that it works is if you have grade 1, it is a characteristic symptom, but it was only seen perhaps in one or a very few provers in the case. Grading 2 would be that it was seen in a few or many provers. So this is nothing to do with clinical practice, only provers. Grade 3 would be if that proving symptom had been verified in clinical practice at least one occasion. And grade 4 would be repeated clinical verification in practice. So this is the original nature of the grading system introduced by Bönninghausen in his 1832 and 1835 repertories. Unfortunately, Kent truncated it and created 3 gradings and did not use the same level of precision in adding remedies. So it's kind of a big mishmash in the Kentian repertories, but at least in the therapeutic pocketbook repertories, the grading system is at least fairly reliable relative to any other repertory. Bönninghausen created these 2 repertories, and Hahnemann basically wrote a letter to Bönninghausen and suggested that he take these 2 repertories and integrate them together and make one repertory. He praised them. He said, make one repertory out of them, please. Put these 2 together. I beg you again if it would be possible to publish both volumes of your repertory into one. This was a letter that Hahnemann wrote May 27, 1841, just a couple of years before he passes on. And he really advocates that Bönninghausen do this. But Bönninghausen begins to do this. He begins to say, okay, let's put these 2 together. But then he realized that there's a better construction. This is after Hahnemann passes away. And here you can see at the end of this paragraph, he writes, I open a path hitherto untrodden into the extensive field of combination. And this is the revolutionary idea that you find in the therapeutic pocketbook repertory that was so unique and unusual. And basically what he does is he abandons the structure of the 2 first repertories, the repertory of the 1832 Repertory of Medicines which are psoric and the 1835 Repertory of Medicines which are non-psoric, and he abstracts all the symptoms into their condition, location, and modalities. And this allows these little pieces to be recombined for a specific case or for reconstruction of the original proving symptom. It's actually genius the way that it's constructed. And this allowed the repertory to become very compact and flexible. So again, he separates it into condition, locations, and modalities. Concomitants are other symptoms with their own condition, location, and modalities. So there's basically the qualities that we see of the symptom are condition, location, modalities, and concomitants have their other symptoms which are associated with this particular symptom. Okay. So just to quickly review, I'm going to just show you the chapter so you can see how this works, and then we'll go ahead and do the particular case that I was working on. So there are essentially only 5 chapters in total in the therapeutic pocketbook repertory. You've got the regional chapter, the systemic, the general, the modalities, and then the concordances. So let's just quickly review each of these chapters. The regional, which are the different parts of the body, are broken down to 3 sections: the head, the trunk, and the extremities. And then each of those will be further broken down into subsections. So for example, in the head, you find external head, internal head, eyes, vision, ears, hearing, nose, the sense of smell, face, appearance, mouth and pharynx, and teeth and gums. And then you also have under external head things like the bone, the scalp, the hair, the occiput, the sides of the head, the vertex, that would be under external head. And you would also have like the eyes, so all the different parts of the eyes, the eyebrow, the eyelids, the lacrimation or tears, the conjunctiva. You would have vision located under head as well, and the various diseases associated with vision. And under face, you would have things like the lips, the chin, the temples, the cheeks, and the jaw. And then you would have the appearance of the head, whether it's emaciated, whether there's furrows, whether there's swelling or whiskers, any of those types of items. And you would also have the mouth and the pharynx and the various parts, including the odor of the mouth, would be found there as well. You have the trunk, which is broken down to the neck, chest, abdomen, and back. And then you have the extremities, which is upper and lower extremities. And then you have the next chapter, which is called the systemic, which is the different systems of the body, like the digestive system or alimentary canal or the urinary system or the reproductive or respiratory or cardiovascular or thermoregulatory, which would be your chills and your fever and your sweating. So all of the various systems, the general systems of the body would be broken down into a separate chapter. And again, those are broken down into further categories. So under alimentary, you would have the anus and the rectum and the hunger and the thirst and the aversions and desires, erectations, flatulence, and so on and so forth. Under respiratory, you'd have things like respiration, but you'd also have voice, coughing, the taste of the sputa, the airway secretions, and things of that nature. Under cardiovascular, you'd have the heart, the blood vessels, the blood and circulation, the pulse. And under the thermoregulatory, you'd have things like the chill, the heat, the fever, perspiration, the way the perspirations and heat and fever follow. This is a very interesting chapter. We largely ignore this type of thing, but if you look at the old-time homeopaths, they spent an inordinate amount of time describing very exactly, when the fever will follow the chill, will follow the perspiration, what process, the time between each of these, and they would describe it very, very carefully. And it's a very good way to be able to determine a good remedy prescriptions by actually watching the actual sequencing of the thermoregulatory processes in the body. And then you have the general chapter, which would include mind and disposition, sleep, and generals. And the mind would be broken down into the mind, intellect, memory, and sensorium. And what's very interesting is if you look in the mind and disposition chapter, you'll notice that there's very little information. Now, as a veterinary practitioner, you might say, hey, this is pretty good here. And it's true, for the most part, there's very, very little information. You can see, I don't know, there's 20 rubrics here in total. And you compare that to the Kentian repertories, or the way that Kent would analyze a case looking at all the mental symptoms, or George Vithoulkas would look at all the mental symptoms, you can see that this has a completely different disposition and orientation towards the mental symptoms of the case. And the reason for that is that really the understanding of the human psyche, the way that we understand it today, didn't really get introduced until the late 19th century with the advent of people like Freud and Jung and Reich. And at the time of Hahnemann, the understanding of the human psyche was much more simple. And you can see this illustrated quite nicely in the footnotes of Aphorism 213, where Hahnemann writes, thus aconite will seldom or never produce either a rapid or permanent cure if the patient's emotional state is quiet and uniformly calm. He doesn't go through the whole complex description of aconite with the panic and the fear and the fright and all the other stuff that we know about aconite. He simply says that, if the person is calm and quiet, we're not going to think about aconite. And he says, for nux vomica, if the person's mild and phlegmatic, we're not going to give nux vomica. No talk about competitiveness and high sexual nature and ambition and all the things that we think of about nux vomica. He doesn't talk about that. He just talks about if they're mild and phlegmatic, we're not going to think of nux vomica. And if the patient's, glad, cheerful, and stubborn, we're not going to think of pulsatilla. And if their, state is unchangeable and not inclined to fright or vexation, well, that's probably not going to be ignatia. So you can see that these are what we refer to as Gegen symptoms, symptoms that would go against the prescription of a remedy. And we can use mental symptoms like that, and that's the way that Hahnemann is describing it here in the footnotes for Aphorism 213. So you can see even in the intellect section, very, very little, very few rubrics, certainly not the vast expression of mental and emotional symptoms that we see in the contemporary materia medica or contemporary repertories. And the same thing with the sensorium, very, very little information. Sleep, you've got interesting things there, and the generals would include things like the bones and the joints, in general, the skin, eruptions, warts, nails, ulcers, and things of that nature. The next chapter is the chapter called Modalities, and this is the chapter that's very extensive. And you can see that if you just look at the modalities from situation and circumstances, it's much larger than the mental section, and that's because Bönninghausen really emphasizes the importance of the modalities in determining the best remedy, that he says this speaks directly to the sensitivity and susceptibility of the patient. You can see this also expressed in the organon in Aphorism 133. This is the section on case taking where Hahnemann emphasizes that during the case taking process, you ask questions like, does the befallment lessen or pass away with the movement of the part, or walking, or standing, or eating, or drinking. He's telling you, you've got to ask these questions to clarify the modalities of the case, because again, the modalities speak directly to the sensitivity and the susceptibility of that individual to various stresses in the environment. And the modalities are, as we know in practice, invaluable for finding the best remedy. The final chapter in the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory is called the Concordances, and this is essentially a description of the relationship of remedies between each other. It was found in clinical practice that some remedies would tend to follow and complete the action of other remedies more commonly than they would with other remedies, that there were these strong relationships and associations. And Bönninghausen was the first person in the Concordance chapter, which is the last chapter of the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, to begin to discuss or look at these various types of relationships or concordances between remedies. Okay, so these are some quotes about the concordances and how to use them from the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, and then this very interesting quote by McNeill also about the concordances. They were largely not understood, but they actually can be very valuable in practice, because oftentimes the second and third and fourth prescriptions in a case can be more difficult because you don't have oftentimes as much. It's oftentimes difficult to determine which remedy is the best choice, and oftentimes there'll be two remedies which might be strongly competing as possibilities. And if that's the case and you're not able to ascertain which is the better choice, you're going to go with the one that has the stronger relationship with the previous remedy that had acted in the case. Okay, I just want to quickly mention that this is just a very quick overview on the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory. If you want more information or to learn more about how to use it in practice, we do offer two great courses. One's called Homeopathic Diagnosis by George Dimitriadis, and the other one is the TBR2 course by Dr. Jamie Oskin. They're both great courses and will help you to learn exactly how to use this repertory in practice if that's something you're interested in adding to what you do when you're seeing your patients. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that case. Are there any questions before we go through the case itself?
I do not see any yet.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead then and read through the case. So I'm going to read through the case, and what you can do as I'm reading through the case is write down symptoms that you think are of interest, symptoms that you think are striking or important. Write those down. Certainly, if a remedy comes to mind, you can jot that down as well. But the most important thing first is to identify which symptoms we think are most important, put those aside, convert those symptoms into rubrics in the repertory, repertorize our case, and then go through the list of remedies that come up and see if we can find one that really does best match the totality of the characteristic symptoms in our case and the totality of the case in general. So this is a case of migraine headaches. Janice is a 38-year-old woman who came to see me for recurring headaches, which she had been dealing with since her early 20s. She would have on average 2 to 3 headaches a week, each one following a typical symptom picture and course of development. The headaches would start slowly over a period of a few hours and would last anywhere from about 6 to 12 hours. There didn't seem to be a particular time of the day when the headaches would start. Janice was unable to describe anything in her early 20s which might have been associated with or had precipitated the headaches. I always ask people, when they say that headaches started at a certain age, I ask them, like, what happened during that period of time? And, oftentimes there might have been some major life shift or change. That's very important to be aware of. In this particular case, I was unable to identify. I asked lots and lots of questions, but there didn't seem to be anything that I was able to determine might have been associated with it. Continuing with her headaches, she would usually experience slight nausea and a general sensitivity to noise and bright lights. Even though Janice can experience nausea with the headaches, she will never vomit. She says, "I'm just not a person who vomits." The headaches would always be located in the forehead and sometimes on the top of her head. And she described the sensation as a dull pressure, as if someone were pushing against the top of her head and forehead. Any kind of movement would aggravate the pain, but especially walking up or down stairs would cause the greatest aggravation. Pressure on the vertex would help to ameliorate the pain, but only when applying the pressure. So once the pressure was stopped, the pain would return immediately. And the pain was also better from walking in the open air. Janice also complained about feeling exhausted all the time, and especially after any physical or mental effort. She took a lot of different vitamin supplements to keep herself going. A period of prolonged study could bring on the migraines, especially if she was also physically tired. And she indicated that her concentration and memory were not very good, and that there was a feeling of dullness. Janice also complained of frequent ringing in the ears, and she started developing the symptom also in her mid-20s. In addition to the primary complaint of migraine headaches, Janice also has intractable constipation with very hard stools. She would tend to only have a bowel movement every 2 to 3 days and would often have to do an enema for relief. Janice also had a general feeling of tension in her back. She indicated that she could remember having the sensation even as a child. In general, Janice was slightly warm but often experienced cold hands and feet. Food desires included bread, starches, fruits, sweets, and dairy products. Janice had a strong aversion to any kind of meat fat, and she remembers as a child always having disgust for it. Janice tends to be shy with a tendency towards anxiety. She doesn't like confrontation and prefers to be left alone when upset. She works hard and takes her responsibilities seriously. All right, that's the case. So just suggestions on important symptoms that we should look for in our remedy, or we'd like our remedy to have cover.
Okay, any takers, any volunteers? Okay, don't see any. Personally, I'd want to start with the modalities. Looks like you've got a couple of clear ones in the case.
Okay, which one
I
would you
don't
like to?
know. Well, I don't know how characteristic or how common, like, for example, the pressure. I believe you said that pressure on the vertex would help to ameliorate the pain, but only when applying the pressure.
Yeah, that's a great symptom. I love it. I don't see that very often. Uh, I
Hmm.
mean, the pressure can definitely help with a headache, but it's just so striking here that you push the pressure and it immediately ameliorates it completely. And as soon as you let it go, I mean, to me, that's a very characterizing type of symptom. So I agree with you. I definitely use that.
Yeah, and it would be real nice to see that as the primary symptom or any symptom in the remedy, but also the better walking in the open air.
Yeah, better walk in the open air is a nice
Yeah.
symptom. I agree. Yeah. Any other ones or anybody
I,
else in the group?
Sue, do you have any? I'm not sure who can speak or not. I don't see. Oh, Stephen is raising his hand. Stephen, what you got? Can you hear us? Okay, let's see.
I'm not an organizer, so I can't see the questions or anything.
Yeah, no, the only thing we have is a hand raised by Stephen, and nothing a question. So let me see if I can type a question to him.
I mean, I assume they can hear us, right?
Yep, yep, yep. And it looks like also Joletta has her hand raised, but I don't see her connected audio up, and her hand just went down. So I guess he answered up and it went back up. So Joletta, can you hear us or say anything?
I think there's something wrong technically because they should be able to type in and I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, yeah. Stephen typed in
Oh, he did. Okay.
that that he would like to see the difficult stool in there.
Okay. I
And
mean, it's the thing is, it's certainly we want a remedy that will have a tendency towards constipation, but it's not. The thing is that rubric, whatever repertory you use, it's not going to exclude a lot of remedies. So you can use it, but practically speaking, it won't help you that much. So try to find the things. It's not to say you don't want a remedy that has a tendency towards constipation. It's just the problem is there's so many remedies that have a tendency towards constipation that it's not an easy way to get to the remedy. You understand? So you got to try to find rubrics that are a little bit more peculiar or unusual in the case. Otherwise, you'll end up with just a bunch of polycrusts at the top.
And Bianca has modality that motion aggravates.
Yeah, and I think particularly it was specifically ascending and descending the stairs that were particularly. So it was motion in general, but specifically ascending and descending. Yes, but especially walking up or down stairs. So that's the particular unusual characteristic that I would focus on. Okay. All right. Are there any other ones that anybody wants to suggest, or I can show you the ones that I thought were important in the case?
Well, Joletta typed in also walking up and down stairs.
Okay.
And yep, so that's it.
Yeah, so here I highlighted in yellow the symptoms that I thought were really important. So the fact that the headache is always located in the forehead and sometimes on top of the head. So it's always in the forehead. So that's a location, and I'm going to pay attention to that. Now, maybe the vertex is not quite as important because it's only sometimes on the top of the head, but it's always in the forehead or on the top of the head. Those are two good locations. I would want a remedy that has an affinity for those two locations. It's a dull pressure as if someone were pushing against the top of her head. So that describes the quality of the headache. And any movement would aggravate, but especially walking up or down the stairs. And then here's that very interesting symptom that Jeff mentioned at the beginning, which is pressure on the vertex would help to ameliorate the pain, but only when applying the pressure. And that I think is a very interesting symptom. Once the pressure was stopped, the pain would return immediately. The pain was also better from walking in the open air. So here we have a nice description of the locations, the sensations, and the modalities associated with this particular primary complaint. Now, there are some other interesting symptoms in the case. She's exhausted all the time, and especially after any physical or mental effort. So I think that's interesting. It speaks to her general sensitivity and what affects her. And also prolonged study could bring on the migraines, especially if she was also physically tired. So this all seems to be related. You know, studying physical effort weakens her and also seems to bring on the headaches. She also has this ringing in the ears. That's very interesting. And that also started around the same time as the headaches. So I think that's of use. And she has a very strong aversion to any kind of meat fat. And because it's so strong and she's had it her whole life, I consider that to be an interesting symptom because it's very, very, very strong. You know, the fact that she likes bread and starches and fruit and sweetened dairy products, you know, that's not such a big deal. But this strong aversion to fat, you know, it would be nice if the remedy that covers her head complaint symptoms would also have an aversion to fat as well. So those are the symptoms that, in my mind at least, are the ones that are most interesting and that I would want to convert into rubrics. So let's go ahead and pull up I'm going to go to MacRepertory, and I'll go ahead and pull up the repertorization of the case. All right, so here is the case. And here's the rubrics. You can see I chose, and again, you can see how everything is split into pieces. So you've got the external head, the forehead, so just the forehead with 43 remedies. I did put the vertex with 28 remedies. The ascending the stairs aggravates. The descending the stairs aggravates. The mental exertion aggravating. The pressure, you see now it's not tied to the head, it just says pressure ameliorates. So I took this forehead location and you see it's all broken apart, but I can recombine them into specific symptoms. So I can take the forehead and the vertex and combine it with the better pressure, and I've got that exact symptom. And then you've got the walking in the open air ameliorates, and I've got the aversion to the fatty food, okay? So you can see those are the symptoms that I highlighted in yellow that I thought were interesting. And if I go ahead and repertorize this case, you will see that only one remedy actually runs through all of these symptoms, which is Menianthes trifoliata. A lot of people might have been thinking of sepia in this case. Certainly sepia was a consideration, but overall, when you read Menthia, and calcarea is another possibility too, in my mind. But I think when you look at the whole case and you read it, I think the fact that Menianthes trifoliata comes out number one in the representation would be the one to go and read and consider. I'd consider the other ones as well. But let's go read what it says about Meniantes trifoliata. So what I did actually, this is buckbean, and this is a remedy that was originally proven by Hahnemann. It's one of those remedies like Moschus mosciferus and Magnetus ambi polo and Magnetus australis, and some of these remedies that Hahnemann proved, oleander, that never made it as polycrusts, for whatever reason. It didn't make it to the status of a pulsatilla or something. And they've largely been forgotten, and yet they have nice provings associated with them and can be useful in particular cases. This is actually a good remedy for malaria. It's up there with one of the top malaria remedies. So what I did is I just took an extraction of some of the proving symptoms from Hahnemann's Materia Medica Pura. Let's go ahead and read through those. So here's one: confusion of the head in the room, like dazedness. The thoughts come with difficulty, though he immediately remembers everything in the open air feels much lighter and freer. Now this is interesting for two reasons. One, you've got the fact that she was already she had cognitive impairment already. She had confusion and a kind of dullness, so that fits. Here you can see it's associated with feeling better in the open air. In our case, she felt better in the open air. Her headache felt better in the open air. But because we can recombine the symptoms, the fact that the better open air is associated with confusion in the head doesn't matter for us, because we can just reorganize and re-put them back together again. Next symptom here, you can see stupid in the head. And then we've got this great symptom, pressure from within outwards in the front part of the head. So here's the forehead location and the pressure pushing outwards. And then another symptom, a pressing from above downwards in the head. So here's on the vertex, which goes off when the hand, that should be hand, that's a typo, is strongly pressed on it, but returns again for many hours. So this is the exact unique symptom that the patient described. And you can see it in the original proving by Hahnemann, where there's a pressure and you put the pressure on, the head pain goes away, but as soon as the pressure stops, the head pain returns. Exact same symptom. You can also see here some of the other proving symptom, oppressive headaches that is aggravated by going up and down stairs, when it seems to him as if a heavy weight lay on the brain which pressed out at the forehead. Again, this is a really perfect modality, and it's associated with the original headache symptom. And then we've got a headache in the temples as if they were compressed from both sides, which went off by compressing with the hand, but then return. And here we see it on the temples again, but it doesn't matter. It's the same idea, that the better pressure, but as soon as you stop the pressure, the headache symptoms return. And then you've got an aching, stupefying pain in the head, which involved the forehead, especially when at rest and when moving. So here again, we see the forehead, and then worse when moving. Let's look at some of the other symptoms in the case that are outside of the primary complaint. So here we see the persistent ringing in the ear, which ceases when the ear is rubbed inside but returns immediately. Now, this is very interesting. This is exactly the same. This is exactly the same quality as we have for the headache symptom, where when you apply pressure, the headache pain goes away, and then when you stop the pressure, it returns. Here we see it with the ringing, where there's a ringing in the ears, but when the ear is rubbed, or when there's pressure applied to the ear, it disappears. But as soon as you stop applying the pressure or stop rubbing the ear, the symptoms return. So this is obviously a quality that we find in Meniantes trifolia, not just associated with the head symptoms, but seems to be something that is generally true for the remedy. We also see in the right ear as if heard bells ringing, so another indication of the ringing of the ears. Here we see retained stool and also constipation for 2 days, and also constipation for 32 hours, then evacuation of hard feces, that's a typo, and then constipation for the first day, but the second day difficult evacuation of a hard stool with drawing, pinching, pains in the hypogastrium, and then also constipation the first day, and only on the third day, 2 easy evacuations. So here we can see a confirmation of the intractable constipation that the patient described in the case. We see that this is also found quite prominently in Meniantes trifoliata. And then continuing looking at some of the other symptoms of the case from Hahnemann's Materia Medica Pura, we've got the icy cold hands and feet while the rest of the body is warm. And we did see that in the case she mentioned, where her general body felt warm, but her hands and feet were oftentimes cold. We also see cold feet for 48 hours. We see swollen blood vessels on the hands and somewhat beyond them on the forearms with ordinary heat of the body and icy cold feet. Again, that same idea. We've also got coldness of the feet lasting into the night. They could not get warm even in bed. And then we've got very great heat all over the body, without perspiration, without thirst, with cold feet. So all of these, again, are proving symptoms from many of these trifoliata that confirm this idea of a warm body and cold hands and feet. And you'll see this written about, this symptom written about from many of these with other authors as well. Lippe writes about it, Berkey writes about it, many other authors write about it. And then finally, for many of these in the original proving, we have some general symptoms like anxious feeling about the heart, as if something bad were about to happen and he had to undergo a calamity. And if you remember, one of the prominent mental symptoms of the case was a type of anxiousness or anxiety. And here we can see that anxiety does exist in many of these trifoliata. We also see the mental symptom cross, ill-humored, and discontented with himself and his position. Anxiety drives him from one place to another. Again, the idea of anxiety in the remedy. Here we see he prefers to be alone, though not ill-humored, because he would rather be silent than talk. And if you remember in the case, if you go down here, you can see that Janice tends to be shy towards with a tendency towards anxiety. She doesn't like confrontation and prefers to be left alone when upset. She works hard and takes her responsibilities seriously. So this idea of needing to be left alone, here you see it right here, prefers to be left alone, though not ill-humored, because he would rather be silent than talk. We also see all day silent, reserved humor with self-satisfaction and tranquil disposition. He was contented with his position. So these all kind of fit nicely. Certainly there's nothing that would work against a Maniathes trifoliata prescription, so there's no Gagin symptom, as Hahnemann refers to in the footnote of Aphorism 213, that would work against the prescription of this particular remedy. Okay, so that's the case. I see we have about 8 minutes left. Let me just mention that if you are interested in acquiring the Therapeutic Pocket Repertory, you can purchase it in MacRepertory. If anybody's interested or wants more information about that, you can send me an email at kim@synergyhomeopathic.com. That's kim@synergy homeopathic.com. Okay, can I answer any questions for anybody about the cases or any other aspect of what I've...
Let's see. No hands raised right now. I have a quick question. Does Synergy include George's intro and appendices? You know, or just the
No, the whole book is in there.
How do they incorporate that into the repertory?
It's under the keynotes, so you have to go to the keynotes and you can find all the chapters listed in there. So that's where you would find like all the introductory materials that's in his book, and then you would find the end notes under the cross references. So the end notes are available right under each rubric, which is really nice. So it's even better than, because in the book they're actually end notes. So you have to go to the back of the book and find them. Here, they kind of function like footnotes because they're actually right under each rubric. And then all the other information, which is really useful because he explains a lot about how to use the repertory and how it's constructed. That's all available in the keynotes part of the book.
And we had a couple of questions about the case, if you don't mind.
Yeah, not at all.
So I want to know, and we all want to know, how you dosed or how the patient was treated, how she responded.
So I have to look, but I'm pretty sure I gave one dose of 200 C in this case. And the patient did extremely well. All the headache symptoms disappeared, but the constipation was not affected whatsoever. And later on, I gave her one dose of Maniathes trifoliata 200 C, I believe, pretty sure. And then we waited a period of time. All the headache symptoms went away. They never returned. The constipation remained, and I ended up giving her calcarea at a later date, which is actually listed under concordances for Maniathes trifoliata. And that didn't completely get rid of the constipation, but it helped quite a bit. And then, she has to be very careful with diet and things like that, but she's doing quite a bit better.
Okay. And Gillette, was wondering if you dosed in water and, did you dose her in the middle of a migraine or not? want to avoid.
It was not during the migraine, and I gave her one dry dose. If I'd repeated it, I probably would have put it in solution and succussed it. But it was a largely functional case. There wasn't, this is a good case to give a higher potency in. And it was also quite a clear case in my mind. I mean, I thought the indications for many antis were very clear.
Okay, great. And you had mentioned that, pretty much all the rubrics are directly referable to, proving symptoms. And I'm wondering, is there direct linkage between the repertory and the materia medica pura, or how do you do that?
Ask the question again so I can understand it.
That each rubric in the
Yeah.
TBR2 is directly referable to a proving symptom.
Well, you can't find it through the therapeutic pocketbook repertory. You'd have to go back and look at the original 1832 or 1835 repertories, because only in those repertories will you find the original references that will allow you to trace it back to either a proving symptom or sometimes toxicology information. So what basically Bönninghausen did, what Hahnemann did, is he derived his materia medica from provings and from toxicology reports. Basically he broke those symptoms apart to construct them in terms of mind, vertigo, head, yada, yada, yada. And Bönninghausen just further deconstructed those symptoms into their really constituent parts of condition, location, modality, so on and so forth. But you can't reconstruct that through the therapeutic pocket repertory because there are no author references. So the only way to do that is to go back to the original 1832 and 1835 repertories, and from there you could reconstruct the original information.
So the references that we see they're not page references. Well, I'm just wondering what the bracketed references are referring to. 010, 015, 1845.
Oh, you mean in here?
Yeah.
That's the rubric number.
And why does that matter if we're not going to be able to trace back?
Well, that's just to find that rubric, and so I could tell you rubric number 1723 is is better eating or whatever it is. It's a way for me to identify. You could find it in the book easily if you want. You could find it. We could have a conversation and say, I don't have to tell you the whole name of the rubric. I could just tell you, rubric 1222, and you could find that in the book in 2 seconds. So that's why those numbers are there.
Got it. All right, and I hate to monopolize, but it looks like nobody is asking questions. So I've got one last question before we
got a taciturn group here.
It is tonight, yeah. I would think the TPR would stimulate a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
Actually, Sue has a comment about how to be. Okay, yep. And that was just reference to the modality chapter, because some of the modalities are going to be both aggravated and ameliorated. So to use just that one rubric?
Well, the way it's constructed in a kind of a strange way, what you'll see is sometimes the amelioration is listed under as a subgrouping under aggravation, and the whole name is kept. So it's a little bit confusing when you look at it, but it's actually, if you look at the very end, you'll see what the rubric actually is. So you got to read through it carefully, because sometimes it'll say, head pain, better pressure, and then you'll see right afterwards it'll say aggravated pressure, and that actually is the rubric for aggravated pressure, but the word ameliorated from pressure is actually in the rubric name. So just read it to the end so you know that you're using the correct rubric.
Say that again, Kim. It's Susan Beale.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have to talk like Yoda to be able to read rubrics. So it's ameliorated pressure and aggravated pressure?
No, it's just the last part, but sometimes the way that they constructed it, for whatever reason, it'll say, something pressure, ascending aggravates, and then it'll say descending ameliorates, okay? And it's actually descending ameliorates is the actual rubric.
Okay.
You know, so just look towards the end because they just put the first
Right,
part
right.
of it. I understand it's a little bit confusing, but you have to just read it carefully. It was confusing for me when I first started working with it myself. So it just took a little bit of time to.
So in your screen that you're showing, those two rubrics, one is that descending aggravates and the other is descending I'm just looking at what 1845 and 1846.
This one is descending aggravates and this one is descending aggravates. That's what it is.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
There's no universal modalities. It's not that one modality is applied to either. It's either aggravating or ameliorating.
Yes, correct. Well, no, because sometimes it says, look, it says here ameliorates, descending ameliorates, descending aggravates. But this is really descending aggravates. It's a little, you have to just read it carefully. It's a little bit confusing, but the way it was constructed.
Okay, anything else?
So if you had taken those symptoms, Kim, and if you'd taken those symptoms, and I haven't done it, I can do it just as easily as you can do it. But if you'd taken those symptoms and put them into Kent, would you have expected to see that? I'm not going to say a small remedy, but that relatively smaller-ish remedy. Do you think that would have been as predominant in your case analysis?
In this case,
or would it have been overshadowed with those large polycrests?
Well, in this case, many anthes would have shown up in the repertorization covering all the symptoms because these are clear indications for many anthes. But it may not have been number one in the list, and there may have been many other remedies that would have also covered all the symptoms. I could repertorize, but I could almost guarantee you that would happen. So it would probably be like 10 or 15 remedies that would cover all the symptoms, and many anthes would be one of those 10 or 15 remedies. But there would be some cases
would be one of them, and our tendency would just say,
well, if we don't know many anthes, we'd have to start reading.
Right.
Yeah, we'd have to start reading through.
That's exactly, and our tendency would be to say, "There's those other big dogs. Let's use them."
Yeah, my guess is a lot of people would have given sepia in this case. That's what I guess.
And Joletta was wondering,
right, or calcarea.
Or calcarea, yeah.
Or calcarea.
Yeah.
Joletta is wondering if the head pressure was going internal or external. You know, what was the direction of the pain?
I don't know if I remember. She just said pressure, so I guess it was, I don't remember exactly what way it was described.
Got it. Okay.
Well, she said it was like somebody was mashing on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pressure outwards, So
yep.
Generally what it is. Yeah.
So let me just do one more quick survey, and I don't see any other questions. So anything else, anyone? Nope. Okay, don't see anything. So Kim, do you have anything you want to see before we?
No, just my pleasure always to hang out with my friends in the veterinary homeopathic community, and look forward to seeing all of you in North Carolina, or however many of you will be there.
And it was a pleasure listening to you and watching, and we all again look forward to seeing you in Asheville in October.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.